Hey everybody, this is Deb with Truthification Chronicles, and before we get started on the Sidney stuff, we're going to start with this, because this is a video that I found today. It was one of those that, YouTube kind of put up in the recommended videos, and I'm so glad it did. They did a good job on this one, because this girl did an excellent job on this video, and you really need to watch it. It's about 9 minutes long, and well worth the time. And the title of it is, What is Really Happening in Sweden, Greta? And she addresses the whole Greta thing, and she does a really good job of it. She is from Sweden, and she speaks in English, though, in this. But she really puts down some excellent truths about the situation and how a lot of these things that Greta was extolling, they really are affecting Sweden. And the immigration issue and climate change issue, she addresses them in a very good way. So I'm going to leave the link to this down below, and you can find it there. It'll be like in the description down here. Sometimes you have to click the show more to get to it, or if you're on your cell, sometimes there's little dots like this that you can click on. And I want to show you a feature because we all have time constraints. So if you will do this, you can click on the playback speed and you can change the speed on my videos to like 2 if I talk too slowly for you, because I can't possibly talk as fast as you can listen. All right, maybe some younger people can, but I can't. I'm an old lady, so I can't do that anymore. But I wanted to share that with you, and you can usually find it. I found it on my TV. I found it on my cell phone, so I can do it on any of those devices, and I can watch things at double speed just because there's so much out there. Now, sometimes some people talk really, really fast, and I can't listen at double speed, but I can usually listen at 1.5. I watched a hearing this afternoon that had Christopher Wray in it, and I watched that at like 1.5 to part of the time, but there were some people there that talked really, really fast, so I had to slow it down for those. But anyway, here we are. And we're going to talk about Sidney Powell. Yeah, Sidney does a great job here on a major slapdown to Mueller's prosecutors that went after Flynn. I mean, this is excellent. And she posted this yesterday and said, update today's at General Flynn filing. And this is the link to this Conservative Treehouse article right here that you can read. And Reconstructing Justice, Flynn defense submits outstanding Sur-Surreply to counter prosecution. Okay, now, as I understand it, a Sur-Reply is what the government wrote to her motion to compel. That was their reply to her. And then she wrote this Sur-Surreply, I guess. Is that what it says here? Yeah, it's really kind of weird. It's a response to the prosecution's last argument. And that's what it was. But this article right here is really a summary of the actual document, because the actual document is a few pages long here. In fact, it says 32 pages up here, and it is technically 32 pages, but the last half of it is pages about more evidence that she refers to as she goes through this. And it says it's one of 18 pages, the actual filing. But technically it's one of 17. Okay, it really is. The 17th page is the last page of her filing. The 18th page is just the little thing that talks about the service of it, that it was sent out and served at this particular time and everything on this date. So technically it's only 17 pages long. I thought you'd appreciate that. So anyway, we go down here, and this is Mr. Flynn's Sur-Surreply in support of his motion to compel production of Brady material and for an order to show cause. Now, if you haven't followed my other Flynn videos, I have a whole playlist for Flynn. So if you want to watch Flynn, you can just go into the playlist and do the whole playlist. It'll play every one of them. Just go from one to the other if you want to. Or you can pick out the ones that are most interesting to you. Anyway, the Brady material is material that the federal government has to supply as prosecutors. They must supply to the defense because it's material that could be exculpatory towards the defense. So it could prove that the defendant is innocent. And because the government, when it prosecutes things, they have I think it's 95% rate of winning. So they really do hold almost all the cards. That's why they make it so that they have to provide any evidence that they came across in their investigation that could exonerate the person. So they're supposed to give that to the defense so the defense lawyer could use it if they need to. And that's what Sidney Powell has been claiming, and that's what she claimed in her motion to compel, that these Mueller prosecutors are withholding this kind of exculpatory evidence about General Flynn. So they've been keeping it under wraps in order to force him into having this guilty plea. So this is where she's at. She says the government sought and received permission to file a Sur-Reply by complaining that the defendant had bootlegged new arguments into his reply. Yet its Sur-Reply either elides the supposedly new material altogether or does not address it in terms. The government's Sur-Reply is new only in its stunning admissions and untenable paradoxes. According to the government, it had no obligation to produce its superfluity of Brady evidence before Mr. Flynn pleaded guilty, which is just ludicrous, because he was not a defendant until he was formally charged, and it had no obligation to produce its cash after he pleaded guilty the same or next day. Well, because his guilty plea erased its obligation. Yeah, this was our argument. I mean, it's so crazy. Well, let's see, we didn't need to give it to him ahead of time because he wasn't actually charged yet. And we didn't give it to him afterwards because his plea made it clear that we didn't have to do that. And it's just so bogus. It's such a stupid argument. She's got a lot of these big footnotes here. I'm not going to read the footnotes, but they are worth reading, by the way. So anyway, she says, if accepted, the government's approach would allow endless manipulation by prosecutors, target individuals, run search warrants, seize devices, interrogate for days, threaten family members, cajole, but never charge until the clock strikes midnight once a plea is extracted. Yet playing cat and mouse with the due process clause is the opposite of what the Brady-Bagley-Giglio line of cases is all about. Perhaps even more significantly, the government's position wholly ignores this court's standing order, which not only has no such timing requirements, but is issued for the precise purpose of eliminating the games the government played here. One point is new. Mr. Van Grack finally admits he recognized a serious conflict of interest between Mr. Flynn and the counsel who prepared his FARA filing. Yet he fails to respond to the point made in Mr. Flynn's reply that this conflict existed only because the government insisted not only on incessantly attacking Flynn's FARA registration, beginning within weeks of its filing, but also on demanding its pairing with the completely unrelated White House interview prosecution. See, they were just trying to match things up. I'm telling you, they were targeting Flynn, and they were trying anything possible, but the guy didn't have any dirt on him, so they couldn't pin anything on him. That's going to become clear as I go on. Simultaneously, the government did not even advert to the primary argument that the conflict was non-consentable, which meant that even if former counsel had fully disclosed and explained the risks associated with the conflict, Flynn could not agree to waive it. The Covington and Burling lawyers, that's his former lawyers, could not remain in the case. Most important of all, the government did not move to disqualify the lawyers or bring the matter to the attention of any court. See, they really had a responsibility to do that. The government lawyers, they didn't do that. And so once again, another thing that they did, trying to get Flynn, they didn't play by the rules. Far from addressing whatever it claims was new in Mr. Flynn's reply, the government largely regurgitates its prior denials of any Brady obligation before the first plea. But Mr. Flynn's motion, brief, and reply also highlighted material the government suppressed long after this court's Brady order through what was scheduled to be a sentencing hearing and continuing to this day, despite persistent, detailed requests by new counsel. Thumbing its nose at this court's Brady order, ignoring this court's gentle reminder of its primacy, and failing to even produce the requested evidence in camera, the government has stonewalled against producing so much as a single document the government itself identified as exculpatory, but provided only heavily redacted or in meager summary. It is all this conduct that demonstrates contempt for this court's order. The government has known since prior to January 24, 2017, that it intended to target Mr. Flynn for federal prosecution. Now, keep in mind when it says the government, it's actually talking about Mueller's prosecutors, because those are the ones that are representing the government in this. Yeah, isn't that sad? Our taxpayer dollars are funding the prosecution against Mike Flynn. Yeah, it ticks me off too. I know. So they knew ahead of time. That is why the entire, quote, investigation of him was created at least as early as summer 2016. I told you it was going on for a long time. And they only ended up getting a FISA warrant for him. And it's not been totally confirmed that there was a FISA on Flynn, but I'm like 99% sure there was, because of some of the things that were said during questioning of, I think it was, Clapper and Yates. And so, anyway, I think that the FISA warrant was created because they had been surveilling Flynn long before that. And it was done illegally. So they did the FISA warrant to make it legal. That was after the election, I'm pretty sure, or thereabouts. Anyway, and pursued despite the absence of a legitimate basis, which they seem to be really good at, pursuing these things without legitimate basis. That is why Peter Strzok texted Lisa Page on January 10th, 2017, sitting with Bill watching CNN, a ton more out. We're discussing whether, now that this is out, we can use it as a pretext to go interview some people. The word pretext is key, thinking he was communicating secretly with only, and again, this is really long, but it's worth reading. It's just not right now. Paramore, before their illicit relationship and extreme bias were revealed to the world, Strzok let the cat out of the bag as to what the FBI was up to. Try as he might, Mr. Van Grack cannot stuff that cat back into that bag. I like the way she talks. She really does write this in a very easy-to-read way. A lot of lawyers, they try to lawyer it up and make it sound all gobbledygooky, and it's hard to understand sometimes when they do that. Former Deputy Director Andrew McCabe as much as admitted the FBI's intent to set up Mr. Flynn on a criminal false statement charge from the get-go. On December 19, 2017, McCabe told the House Intelligence Committee in sworn testimony, the conundrum that we faced on their return from the interview is that although the agents didn't detect deception in the statements that he made in the interview, the statements were inconsistent with our understanding of the conversation that he actually had with the ambassador. McCabe proceeded to admit to the committee that, quote, the two people who interviewed Flynn didn't think he was lying, which was not a great beginning of a false statement case. Okay, get that. He called it a false statement case. Again, starting out with someone they wanted to be guilty of a crime, instead of actually starting out with a crime. See? Oh, had the FBI not intended all along to create a false statement case, there would have been no conundrum at all. The matter simply would have concluded with the interview. Further, there would have been no comment about a false statement case because no such case would be assumed. Finally, there would be no lamenting the poor start of a false statement case because there would not have been a start. False statement cases normally arise incidentally when government agents are investigating a matter and the interviewee makes a misstatement about that matter. Agents then seek to get to the truth by giving 1001 warnings to coax truthful information from the suspect. If somebody makes a false statement in front of them, they often will come at it from a different perspective and ask the question in a slightly different way, so that they can verify whether the person just misremembered it or if the person actually is lying about it. And so that's what they typically do, but they didn't do that with Flynn. But here, to use Strzok's own words, the investigation was a pretext. The object of the interview was to secure, rather than prevent, a 1001 violation. Okay, so see, they were trying to set him up here, instead of trying to say, no, wait a minute, did he really mean what he just said? Or is this just we misunderstood what he was saying, and try to clarify it? The poor start further reveals Mr. McCabe's determination to create a case despite the agent's belief Mr. Flynn was telling the truth. Having such concrete evidence as the prosecution's thinking processes is rare. Having it in text messages and sworn congressional testimony is priceless. I mean, it's all there. I'm telling you, this should be a slam dunk case that Flynn is totally exonerated of these charges, because it's so obvious. We have the text messages. We have sworn congressional testimony. What more should we need? The original 302 or evidence of its attempted destruction are being suppressed. The government attempts to gloss over the existence of at least one earlier draft of the Flynn 302, then asks this court to leap blindly to the conclusion that if it did exist, it contained the same information as the government has already deigned to produce. Aside from this inherent contradiction, as explained in Mr. Flynn's reply, the FBI Sentinel system, this is like their computerized system, can retrieve any draft. Drafts are numerically serialized when placed in the system. Those numbers, apparently redacted from the 302 drafts that have been produced, would probably provide further information. You gotta wonder why they took those numbers off. Yeah. It is no excuse that the original Flynn 302 is not, quote, in the possession of Mr. Van Grack at this moment. Now remember, Van Grack is the Mueller prosecutor here. Rather, his obligation is to reach out to his colleagues and obtain it. And there's the case for that. Prosecutors have a duty to learn of any favorable evidence known to others acting on the government's behalf. It is in the FBI system, or can be retrieved along with the audit trail, the A1 files, information about any attempt made to destroy it, and all the metadata for the changes, which are more important now than ever in light of the absurdity of the government's Sur-Reply. Tellingly, Mr. Van Grack does not deny that such information is, in fact, available. The struck page text messages confirm that Lisa Page had 2 opportunities to edit drafts of the crucial 302. Strzok returned to his FBI office the night of February 10, 2017, to input the edits she made on the draft she had earlier left in Bill Priestap's office, about which they hatch a cover story, then sent her another version over the weekend. The government thus implicitly admits that there was at least one version prior to the February 10th edition. And by the way, all of these text messages and things like that she's referring to are part of that evidence, the last several pages that are listed here. To add to the brazen disregard for this obligation to preserve and locate exculpatory evidence, the government claims entitlement to a favorable assumption about the suspiciously lost document when it argues that, quote, there is no reason to believe it would materially differ from other drafts. To the contrary, spoliation law requires the assumption that the evidence is favorable to the defense. There's the case on that. The district court properly dismissed the indictment due to the government's destruction of evidence, relying on the test articulated by the Supreme Court in those 2 cases. And then the handwritten notes. I'm going to kind of summarize some of this because I don't want this to be too long. But in this, the handwritten notes are really kind of telling, because Strzok says that he was the one that wrote up the notes, but they also have a copy of Pienka's handwriting because he was taking the notes. Well, the situation is you can't do both. You're not interviewing and taking notes. You see, they go in pairs, so one person can interview and the other person takes the notes. And there are, where's the pictures of them? There are pictures down here where they actually, just a minute, getting there. It's down at the bottom of a page. Like I said, this part gets kind of, oh, here it is. Okay, so this was the 302 here. And you can see that there were some changes that were made. And then there's also a picture, it may be in the other part, in the end part, but there's a picture of the 2 handwriting samples. The one that Peter Strzok wrote up was all nice and neat and in real sentences and it was all, in lines and straight lines and stuff. And it just looked like a prepared statement that somebody had handwritten out. Whereas the Pientka one is like if you're taking notes, where shorthand, you're just kind of writing words instead of writing sentences. And it was much shorter than the Peter Strzok version, supposedly. We don't know 100% if either one of them wrote those, because they didn't sign them, and they were supposed to do that too. And so it goes on. I really don't want to go through the whole thing. I mean, I could. It was very interesting to read, but again, kind of long, and I don't want this being any longer. I want to go down here. I know you're probably going crazy. By the way, I did want to point this part out to you, that right here, Mr. Flynn was named in Mueller's first target authorization letter. The Mueller team soon obtained a search warrant and took possession of all Mr. Flynn's electronic devices, phones, and computers, which they hold to this day. Can you imagine? They still have everything of his. Then they obtained authority to target his son, and they seized all his devices. And I assume they still have those. I mean, this is just kind of crazy. You can't believe this is happening in the United States. Anyway, so she does go through this, but down here at the bottom, she gives a nice little summary. I would go through this all. I mean, I found it fascinating to read. And again, not too difficult, just takes a little while. But if you're, not able to read the whole thing, read that article from the Conservative Treehouse, because it summarizes it. Come on, it's down here. Okay, so like I said, it is actually 17 pages long. See, this is the last page of it. And it's 17 pages. So, conclusion. In conclusion, yes, the government engaged in conduct so shocking to the conscience and so inimical to our system of justice that it requires the dismissal of the charges for outrageous government conduct. And then there's the case for that. However, as fully briefed in our motion to compel and reply, at this time, Mr. Flynn only requests an order compelling the government to produce the additional Brady evidence he has requested in full and unredacted form, and in order to show cause why the government should not be held in contempt. At the appropriate time, Mr. Flynn will file a separate motion asking that the court dismiss the prosecution for egregious government misconduct and in the interest of justice. Mr. Flynn is entitled to discovery of the materials he has requested in these motions and briefs that will help him support such a motion. So at this point, he's not asking to have it dismissed, but he will. And everybody knows it. And I think one of the reasons why she wrote this so it would be a little easier to read is because she knew it was going out to the public. That was her intention. She wants people to read this and to understand. And like I said, see, this was page 17. Well, page 18 is just the certificate of service. So they do that just to get the dates in there. And then at this point, they start with, here's like testimony from the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, where we have McCabe making the statement that he did. And then when you go past that, you get to some of the text messages and things. Yeah, it does go on. Yeah. Keep going. All right. Lots of footnotes. Okay. This right here, I think is really cool. If you go through this, if you haven't been following what exactly the timeline is, this is a really good timeline of what happened January and February of 2017. It started out with that January 5th meeting where they all got together and they were talking about the Steele dossier. And then it has a link here to Grassley's letter and includes Rice's letter outlining what happened at that meeting. So Grassley was doing an awful lot of stuff. He was really working hard. And then it goes on and it has all these different things. Some of them are in red. I think this is interesting. This was January 10th, where it was the passing the baton ceremony, where Susan Rice passed on the National Security Advisor position to Mike Flynn. And then, it's like a tradition. And at the same time, the same day, Clapper calls David Ignatius of the Washington Post with instructions to the effect of take the kill shot on Flynn. That's what was going on. And then from there, I mean, you can just follow each of these things and see how all of them fit together and the whole timeline of it all. I mean, it is amazing. And Grassley is really working on stuff. He had several letters that he was sending. If you know Grassley, I've done a lot of his letters because that's kind of his thing. He writes letters and he says, and I want to know this, and this. And so he's got some really good letters in there where he pointed out, I want to know these things. Give me this information. And this is Inauguration Day. All of those things happened before Inauguration Day, and then it all starts. He was sworn in. Look at this. He was sworn in on January 22nd, and, you go through, and here's where they already started attacking him. 2 days later, and on the 23rd, it was even said they found nothing illicit. That was the Washington Post saying it, too. But then all of a sudden, it was changed, and they made him say things that he didn't really say. That was the whole deal with the 302s. And they didn't follow any of the regular patterns, the regular protocols. And see, FBI clears Michael Flynn and probe linking him to Russia. That was on the 24th. And then everything starts hitting the fan. And so it's really interesting to go through this and to see this timeline. I mean, it's worth looking at because she gives a lot of detail there. See, right there, Comey in White House, Priebus asked if there's a FISA on Flynn. Okay. He asked that because I think there is a FISA on Flynn. It's not come out in the public yet, but I'm pretty sure there is one. But I think that they were surveilling him long before they got the FISA. They just got the FISA because once Trump got in office, they knew it was all going to come out that they'd been surveilling Flynn. And so they figured this was a way that they could cover their butts. So anyway, I think it's well worth reading this particular part. And it's something that you want to make sure that you check into. Also want to point out that Judicial Watch, and this is dated August 29th when they received these, but they got some more pages of Strzok and Page. I'm not going to go down there because it's a few pages before you get there. But they got more pages of the Strzok and Page texts and emails. I think these are mostly emails from what I saw. And there was also a letter in there from Grassley asking, what about this stuff? And Grassley was really checking into it. I only went through the first few pages, but it's 123 pages long. There's a lot down there. And just remember at the beginning, they give you little codes as to why certain things are redacted and everything. So there's several pages of that, but then they get into it and you can read them. Some of them, it's a little hard to understand how they fit in, but there's a lot there. And I'm glad that Judicial Watch is really on the ball trying to get this stuff. Because without them, there's so much we wouldn't know. Anyway, that's what I've got for you on this one. I want to thank you for stopping by, and I'll see y'all later.